I believe I have half an hour to get through this. Is that correct? I would not want to overstay my welcome. First of all, thank you, David, for the introduction as well as the invitation to be here. One thing that David didn't mention is that I'm also a member of the Maryland State Board of Education. Maryland is the only state in the country, as far as I can tell, that has a theoretical physicist on its state board, and that would be me. So my forays in science policy, or particular education policy, go back, when I looked at my records, all the way to 1984 when I wrote a course curriculum for the Boston School Committee in physics for 12th grade. So I've been worried about issues of education for a very long time in my life. In fact, I'm one of those strange people who first got interested in education, then later discovered they could do very interesting mathematical research. So it was the education that actually started me thinking about being a college professor, not the fact that I had been in love with physics. And in fact, I'm one of those strange kids that I first started thinking about science at age 4, and by age 8, I knew I wanted to be a scientist, absolutely, and no question about it. So let me get on with my talk. I thank David for the introduction. It was mercifully short and sweet, and that's the way I like it. So let's get started and see where we can go. So since this is a group of experts, there's a lot of data that I am not going to review because I want to get to the punchline of the work that we've been doing with PCAST for the last 3 years, actually. This is simply a graph of something I'm sure you all know, that as a country we don't do very well on the metric of international performance of our students. We're ranked something like number 23 in science education, and when you look at us compared to the OECD nations. And this test gap, we believe, a lot of us, and there's some evidence that this is going to happen, is going to lead to a skills pay gap. There's an interesting report from Georgetown led by Tony Carnevale. They have an excellent center there that looks at issues of workforce and statistics. And Tony and his group came up with this really interesting graph in this report called the Undereducated American, which basically shows the value of a degree over time. It starts in about 1915, and the simple way to understand the graph is, if you take two people that are comparable, and one person has a college degree and the other person only has a high school degree, how much more money over their lifetime does the person with the college degree earn? And they use basically tax and census data going back to 1915, and they call this a wage premium. And if you go back to 1915, you find out the wage premium for the college-educated individual is 89%. So over their lifetime, they're going to earn 89% more money than the person with the high school degree. But of course, you have to understand that in 1915, we're talking about very small numbers of college-educated individuals. And in fact, they're doctors, they're lawyers, they're bankers. And so you can see that the premium is easy to understand because these people who are actually getting the college degrees are in areas where they're obviously going to be making much more money than the common worker. But interestingly enough, this wage premium through their records falls until about 1950. We understand that World War II was part of the dynamic driving this drop because, in fact, it was the need for pure, raw manpower in terms of driving the industry and driving our warfighting capabilities. But then, since 1950, this wage premium has been gaining again. And by 2005, a college degree is worth 81% more. A person with a college degree essentially will earn, on average, 81% more in their lifetime than someone without. And this is very strange. There's this interesting piece I saw in the New York Times, and I like to point out this particular one because it's one that's so weird I don't know what to think about it. If you look at two dishwashers, one with a college degree and one without, you will find, according to the records, that the dishwasher has a wage premium that says they will on average earn $34,000 a year, while the one without will have a median wage of $19,000 a year. Now, this, of course, warns us about taking too seriously the statistics about the value of a college degree, because clearly the college degree there is obviously not related to the skill set that's being exercised by the person as they're carrying out their duties. But on the basis of Labor Bureau statistics, Tony and his colleagues in this report point out that something like a wage skills gap is going to open up in our country. And in fact, it has already begun to open even back to about 1995 or so. And what these two curves actually discuss is essentially the differential between what a qualified American taking a particular kind of job, which I'll come to in a moment, could earn versus what people without that degree can earn. So it turns out the American dream is under siege. And this is something since today in my capacity as a member of PCAST, I'm part of a group that worries about this a lot. This is PCAST, and I won't go through all of the names. We are graced today to have one of my colleagues, Barbara Shaw, and I, who were reminiscing yesterday about the day that we took this picture, which was at the National Academy. We're 20 private individuals, so like my colleague here, there's a disclaimer. We are private individuals, therefore anything that we say cannot be taken as establishing administration policy. We're simply private citizens commenting on what we see happening from our vantage point. And we're, of course, a very unusual group of private citizens because we have unusual access to the government at all levels. And as well, since PCAST is statutorily directed to give advice directly to the President of the United States, it means that if we want to find out something, the Office of the President actually stands behind PCAST requests for information. That opens all kinds of doors in our society. So essentially we have access to information on scales that are just almost unbelievable. This administration has a strategy about how to fight this problem with what's going on with the American dream being under siege. It has part of this is science, technology, and innovation, and part of the evidences of this is the appointment of Nobel laureates to positions in the government. For example, Steve Chu, our Secretary of Energy, Carl Wyman, who until quite recently was in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Ahmed Zuwail, Mario Molina, and Harold Varmus have held very high positions. Another 25 members of the Academy, the academies, and the Institute of Medicine. We have a scientist for the first time is heading EPA, and so this administration, at least from my perspective, gets it with regard to science in a way, quite frankly, that I have never seen in my life a presidential administration get it. So if you look at what we do at PCAST, we've done lots of studies. The charge of PCAST is extremely broad, and the portfolios that are carried in PCAST are just about anything that you can think of that relates to science and technology. And there's a whole lot in our society these days that do that. So this is a list of some of our studies. According to John Holdren, the Presidential Science Advisor, PCAST has never been asked to do so much so soon. So we have a sequence of reports. All our reports are available to the public on the White House webpage. All you have to do is Google the word White House PCAST. It'll take you to a web page, download for free, there's no charge. You can see everything that we do. It's completely open and available to the public. Our president likes to hang out with smart kids. We've seen lots of evidence of this. This is a meeting that the president had with a group of students called mathletes as opposed to athletes. This is one of the White House science fairs, and for the first time in my recollection, there have regularly been science fairs in the White House. The White House has undertaken a number of STEM education initiatives between various departments. National goals have been set. The president has enunciated these of moving American kids from the middle to the top of the international rankings on science and math tests, and increasing the American proportion of college graduates to the first in the world by 2020. There was a race to the top which had an enormous impact on K-12 education. In fact, it is and again, this is a personal opinion, it's my impression that Race to the Top had a far larger impact on public education than even the people who promoted it thought it would have. It was just an amazingly effective stratagem. I know because in my other hat as a member of the Maryland State Board of Education, we were actually dealing at the other end with Maryland's entry into the competition for the Race to the Top. And I know the amount of energy that the State Department of Education put in, that various groups put in, that happened at the local educational authorities at district level, and it was just amazing to watch. Educate to Innovate is a program about basically trying to get more IT, and we're going to come to that. So in the fall of 2010, PCAST wrote its first STEM Ed report. It was entitled Prepare and Inspire, K-12 Education in Science, Technology, Engineering, and Mathematics for America's Future. I'm going to depart partly from the directive that I got from David, because after watching Barbara talk last night and then sort of looking at this group, I think it's probably more appropriate for me to focus on the recommendations of our first STEM Ed report, this one, instead of our second STEM Ed report, which is called Engage to Excel. If I have enough time, I will go back to look at Engage to Excel, but I think for the purposes of this meeting, I think reviewing what came out in our Prepare and Inspire report is in fact more important. So as I said, if you want to get our reports, that's the web page. They're all on the White House web page. All PCAST documents are there. So what did the first thing in the report conclude? Well, so let me talk about the exercise of PCAST reports, because some people think that PCAST reports are created by this group of individuals that are kind of like a debating society. They go in a closed room, they start talking to each other in big thoughts and big words, and then out at the end pops a report. That's not how it works at all. The way PCAST reports are actually put together is that subsets of PCAST members, so for example, on this particular report, Eric Lander and I were the co-chairs of the report, and we had other people, which I'll come to later on the report, who were PCAST members. So a small group of PCAST breaks itself off with the charge of getting the report done. The report is identified by a process which, I don't know if it's black magic, but it's a consultation between the White House and PCAST, sometimes with the White House saying, we think we need information on this. Our first report on the H1N1 preparation was an example of that, where the White House said, we want PCAST to look at the country's preparation for this onslaught. But sometimes PCAST tells the White House, we think you ought to be looking at this. And so it's a negotiation. But these reports are determined. And then a small group of PCAST breaks itself off to form a part of a working group. The working group, however, is not the entirety of the group that puts the report together. The working group, in fact, is augmented typically by up to a dozen or more outside experts in the area in which the report is going to be written. The working group then engages for sometime as long as a year with the exercise of identifying challenges in a very concrete way, looking for policy levers that can ameliorate the challenges, and also looking for the data experts, because all PCAST reports are constructed on the basis of data. In fact, we in PCAST have a conceit and an affectation. We think that our reports are not beautiful shelf ornaments, but are guidebooks for putting together plans for how to meet challenges. And so if we're going to make that argument, then we want to ground it in what the data are in terms of where it might be appropriate ways to move. So in our so this process typically can be grueling, and Barbara can tell you. Typically, we will have phone calls once a week that last on anywhere from 1 to 3 hours. We sit on the phone. And in this part of the exercise, we're actually even reaching out to a larger pool of experts. So typical PCAST reports basically have the input of on the order of 100 people. And so it's not just PCAST that writes PCAST reports. It's actually going out and polling of the experts, getting from the experts what they think, and then coming back and trying to organize it in a way that you can actually distill a report from this process. And then the report goes to PCAST itself, the working group report. PCAST can, at this point, choose to say, you guys totally blew it, and it can work its will in many different ways on the product that comes out of the working group versus what comes out of PCAST. And Barbara's over there smiling because she knows exactly what I'm talking about, having just gone through this process quite recently. So in our report, we point out that our country must focus on both preparation and inspiration for K-12 education. We need to meet the needs of a STEM-capable workforce, a STEM-proficient workforce, and future STEM experts. So one of the things about our reports, which is slightly different from most reports on education, we're not talking about education as this thing that sits off on the side, and it's kind of this trophy that would be nice to have in your home. Our point of view is that education, as we talk about it, is situated in the demands of making it possible for the American people to continue the American dream into this new millennium. And so it's tied very closely to economics and the economic welfare of the American people. So, in fact, I actually get upset when reporters come to me and say, oh, your report's on education. And I'm like, no, we're talking about the American dream and defending it. That's really what we're after in PCAST. Now, as I said, it's a slightly different mindset. Education is a great thing. It does lots of things for elevating our minds, but it also creates the workforce that allows this country to have such a dynamic economic situation in the world. And that's where PCAST comes to these issues. We have to inspire all students to learn STEM. And one of the things that's interesting is that our demographic changes in our country are so dramatic that we can no longer afford to just throw groups away. And that's one of the things that we are, again, look at the data and find. So in our first report, we found out that the feds are not always so great. In fact, if you look over about 20 years, you find out all kinds of incoherence in what was done. For example, in the Department of Energy, and I know some people have a connection to the Department of Energy, and in fact, we were talking about this yesterday. The Department of Energy at one point told its scientists and affiliated staff, you need to be involved in education. And then within a few years turned around and took exactly 180 degrees and said, you mustn't be involved in education. Now, if that's not a greater example of incoherence, I don't know what it is. And so one of the things that we talked about is that the government needs to have a long-term coherent strategy in how it engages in the issue of education so that we won't see this back and forth such as happened with the Department of Engineering. I'm sorry, the Department of Energy. First recommendation, we want to support the Common Core. Common Core has been part of an amazing transformation. There are a lot of people out there who don't like the Common Core. In fact, I had a conversation with the head of the Baltimore School Union, and she was convinced that all of this accountability in Common Core was actually coming from the Obama administration. And I had to try to explain to her, no, it actually predates the Obama administration. So we support them, and we think that the government ought to do all it can to support this effort, which was initiated at the state level by the governors, not by the feds. And so we like local control. In principle, I mean, we don't have an issue with local control. A lot of people say, well, you know, we don't want the feds coming in. We agree, we don't want the feds coming in either. But we do want to have synergistic, coherent interactions between the locals and the federals. We recommended that there should be trained in the next 10 years, 100,000 great STEM teachers. And by great, we mean teachers with deep content mastery. In fact, in our analysis of the K-12 system, the main problem that we saw was a lack of content mastery. Many people who are trained as educators get a superb training in pedagogy and psychology and sociology, but you know, if you're teaching science, engineering, and mathematics, those things are not going to help you if you don't have the content knowledge. On the other hand, it turns out that for a long time, many of us on our side said, oh, all you do is need to have people with deep content mastery. That turns out to be false also. That you actually do need to have people who have some understanding of pedagogy and sociology and the kinds of things that traditionally our schools of education emphasize. And there are database studies that sort of back these statements up. We made the recommendation that the top 5% of STEM teachers need to be organized into a master teacher corps, and I'm going to come back to this one. When we made this recommendation in 2010, we heard silence for many, many months, even years. And in fact, if you had talked to me a couple of months ago and heard me give a talk like this, I would be loudly lamenting about the fact that I don't know what happened to this recommendation. By the way, the 100,000 teachers recommendation has been taken up by the Carnegie Foundation. In fact, there is an effort in this country to educate 100,000 new, deeply content mastered teachers in STEM fields, and it's moving forward. Educational technology is clearly going to be huge. I don't have to tell you about Sal Khan's efforts on YouTube, the Khan Academy. It's an amazing thing. I think to me one of the most amazing comments about that was made by a student who said, with this, I can learn calculus even though my teacher doesn't understand it. That's just a great, I mean, that is what you want. That's the leverage you want to buy with IT technology. That even in the absence of a teacher with great content mastery, there's a way for a precocious, determined, bright student to get all that he or she needs out of those classes. And so we spent some time talking about what the government should do. And one of the things that we recommended was the creation of a structure called ARPA Ed. I hope most of you know about the ARPAs and DARPAs as they go through their various transformations in life. ARPA is an amazing entity. Most Americans have never heard of it. And yet, DARPA, ARPA, however you want to call it, is responsible for the internet, not Al Gore, right? It's responsible for GPS. It's responsible for night vision. And in fact, there's a sequence of things that have contributed enormously to the American economy that actually start off as DARPA, ARPA projects. And some of the latest, for example, are self-driving cars. There's a challenge that DARPA put out there. Google has risen to that challenge. I don't know if you've seen any of the recent reports, but Google effectively has developed a self-driving car. And so DARPA has been driving the American economy from this unknown position, and what it has really done is drive innovation. And if you look at education in the last decades or so, you find a lack of education. So one of the things that this report recommended was that there ought to be a government structure to drive the education. And that recommendation was driven, it was accepted. There is a kind of ARPA Ed that does exist in the education department, but we're hoping that it will continue to grow because we need something far more robust to get this one done.
Jim,
yes.
what are the chances that ARPA Ed will come into existence?
You should ask my colleague who's sitting in the back here.
My personal opinion is that it's very high.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that because I have a personal interest in that particular recommendation. Part of our process of doing these reports is we look back through history too. PCAST is kind of history camp, and you can look back and ask what were the government responses to previous challenges that have a similar character. And so the thing that came to mind is where did DARPA come from? Well, it was Sputnik, basically. So there was the country was facing a very focused challenge. We recognized, in PCAST we did something interesting one day. We asked, how did you get interest in science among all the members? And almost to the person, every one of us said it was something that happened outside of school. It was something in a planetarium, in a museum, perhaps it was a project that we did with some outside scientists in the local area. And so we recognized the value of out-of-school and after-school activities in terms of providing the inspiration part that drives young people into becoming physicists and mathematicians and engineers and biologists. That it's the inspiration that we also miss out on, and the government needs to find ways to support these out-of-school and after-school activities. We recommended the creation of 1,000 STEM-themed schools. What's a STEM-themed school besides a tongue twister? Well, in my part of the country, there are these two schools called Thomas Jefferson and Blair. In Illinois, there's the Illinois Math Science Academy. In North Carolina, there's the Governor's School on Science and Technology. And of course, the most famous of these institutions are the Bronx High School of Science and in New York City. We think the country could use about 1,000 of these things, but only 200 directed at the high school level. So the great bulk of these, we believe, ought to be aimed at middle school and elementary school, because that's where we're losing our kids. We lose them from STEM, not just at high school, but usually by the time they've gotten high school, they're already opted out. And so we think that we've got to do something better and different there. And then finally, we want the government to as I said, to in a coherent way respond to this. And we actually decided to put a structure in at the National Science and Technology Council where there would be someone carrying this portfolio in time as a permanent responsibility of the job to look at how we're performing, at how the federal government is performing in its role as partner to the locals. So that was our Prepare and Inspire report. Let me, since I'm a little bit concerned time, let me jump ahead here, just slightly. So, as I said, if you had talked to me up to a couple of weeks ago, I would have been lamenting. So, as we were working on the Prepare and Inspire report, I several times, as I told you, we talked to lots of people in putting this report together. One of the groups of people that the working group spoke to were the recipients of the Presidential Awards for Excellence in Math and Science Teaching. PAMST is the acronym. And the PAMST program has been in existence since 1983, starting under President Reagan. These people are fantastic. I don't know if any of you have ever had any interactions with what I call the PAMSTers now, but the PAMSTers are just incredible. And so when the ultimate recommendation from PCAST came to establish this STEM Masters Teachers Corps, the PAMSTers were in the back of our mind, because in our interactions with them, they were asking the question, what can we do more for our country? It's great to have this recognition, but I want to be able to do more. I want to be able to model for my fellow teachers. I want to be able to have input to local administration about what would be useful. And we were looking for a mechanism by which that kind of on-the-ground expertise could be organized into a coherent force for change in K through 12 STEM teaching. And that's, in some sense, the origin of the call for the creation of the Master Teacher Corps. Last week on Wednesday, I was thunderstruck. I was actually supposed to be in Africa last week, but due to the weather, which I really did sort of get thunderstruck, I couldn't make the trip. So it worked out that I was here in the U.S. when this announcement came out that the administration has decided that it is going to try to create this Master Teachers Corps. It'll start with $1 billion investment. It's going to start with an initial class with about $100 million, with about, I think, 50 sites for these master teachers. And in our imagining of the Corps, you should think a little bit like Peace Corps, but domestic. That is, we want this spread across the country. So some people have concerns about, well, you know, places like California, New York have an unfair advantage. We would like to see the program set in such a way that a kid in Montana could get access to one of these master teachers. And the teachers in Montana or in Iowa or you name it, South Dakota, could get access. So we're looking for geometrical coverage with the Corps. It's not to be concentrated in the places where we already have strength. We don't want these people to be taken out of the classroom. We think the most valuable thing that they do is actually in the classroom. But we want to augment that by giving them, first of all, recognizing with more than an honorific. You know, money helps. And so part of the program is that these teachers would get a stipend directly from the federal government of $20,000. Because then you begin to inject some market forces into the teaching of STEM education. We are very much aware that if you look at union regulations, and unions make agreements with their local educational agencies, often these contracts actually almost explicitly forbid differential pay. And so we're looking for a way to reward these teachers that doesn't violate this contract, and we think this is one mechanism. We want the PAMSers to become organized, to become an aware entity. So it's a little bit as if we're attempting to create something like, something I would describe kind of as a National Academy of Educators. It's not quite that, but at some sense, that is its kind of function, to have a coherent group of the country's best educators thinking about solving the country's educational problems in science and technology. And so I tell people these days, I'm walking on clouds, and I will be for another couple of weeks because of this announcement. I think that this is a major victory for our for our efforts to try to transform K-12 education.
Jim, is that a done deal? Is that needed?
Thank you. So I have 1 minute according to my clock here. It is not a done deal. What's done about it is that the administration has taken the steps to dedicate about $100 million to get the start done. The request is going to have to go before Congress to get the remaining $900 million. And as you can well imagine, that's going to be interesting. So let me at this point, I'm not going to have a chance to talk at all about the Engage to Excel report unless you give me some kind of papal dispensation, which I don't see coming. So let me just first of all acknowledge all the people who put in the hard work on the Prepare and Inspire report. I was very happy, along with my colleague Eric Lander, to lead this effort. Let me point out some names specifically that some of you may well know. Bruce Alberts, of course, I think all of us know. Tom Luce, perhaps, is very well known to many of us, Executive Officer of the National Math and Science Initiative, who's retired now, but Tom was just an amazing contributor. Steve Pruitt, Georgia Department of Education, but maybe you know Steve now in his current guise as working with the Chief to get the next generation science standards going. He was actually part of our group to put the Prepare and Inspire report together. Dennis Bartels, the Exploratorium. Who was it I was talking to, the Exploratorium? There. We were talking about the Exploratorium last night. So yeah, we worked with those folks, and so we're very much aware of the capabilities that lie there. Rosina Beerbaum, Dean at Engineer, member of PCAST, Barbara Shaw, who's sitting back here and quiet in the back room, was a major contributor for us in this effort. Linda Curtis Bay, David Shaw, another PCAST member, Joe Handelsman, just a terrific, amazing energy source, currently at Yale University, and also one of our co-chairs on our Engage to Excel report, Shirley Ann Jackson, Harold Varmus, Patricia Wright, Ahmed's a whale. And as you can see, PCAST is fully invested, even at the level of their working group. Remember, that's the smaller group that gets this work done before the big group comes to it. And then we had wonderful support from staff people and other people that we reached out to, like Bob Tinker of the Concord Consortium, Uri Treisman for all of his unusual work in mathematics teaching, and then OSTP and White House staff. And so that's my report, not on Engage to Excel, but on prepare and inspire, because I think we as a country have a chance to do something that we've been trying for a while now. This president, the interest in STEM education and PCAST seems to actually originate with this president, which for me was a very surprising thing, because I know when I got the call, I wasn't quite sure what I was supposed to do, but it became pretty clear pretty quickly that I was expected to have this as one of my main portfolio items among PCAST. And as I said, this comes from the White House. Remember I told you it's a two-way street? This is actually coming down from the White House, so they really, really get it. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions.
Great.
Steve?
Now, you've given us a very clear view of the effort to develop a much stronger STEM, a much stronger population of young people in science, mathematics, engineering. But could you tell us a little about what you've done to address what I think is a much more difficult problem, is the broader issue of science literacy for the non-scientists?
Well,
It's a nasty question.
But look, it's not. It's a question that we are not unmindful of.
Good. I'm not surprised.
The problem is, however, as I said, PCAST is a very particular kind of construct, and unless we can find prior evidence of effective tools for making change, we tend to be moot on the point. There is very little evidence that we know how to deal with the issue of science literacy, which in my opinion is actually a cultural problem. Yeah. It's far broader than the kinds of things we wrestle with.
Sure.
And I don't know anyone who knows how to do that very well.
Well, I think I was looking at the web page for the Pemsters, and there were some teachers there who've been involved in the program we were working on, who were extremely skilled at doing just that. And actually, we'll have a video that grew out of one of those teachers' works that we'll be able to put up on the webpage, demonstrating how the non-science students reacted to the way this particular teacher, Linda Morris, was able to reach them.
As I said, one reason I am walking on clouds is because although I don't know how to do the science literacy for the public, the culture change within K through 12, we want the Pamsters to be part of that. We think that they're ideally situated to carry that burden.
Absolutely.
First of all, because of their knowledge, they're embedded in the system, and yet they're unusual because the process of being inducted into become a Pamster itself is a kind of filter looking for quality and content and what have you. And so we think that if we empower these folks, they can be the change agents that we need. But it will only be within the K through 12 system. It still, still won't be this bigger.
You've got to have that, as you point out, the out-of-school stuff.
Yeah.
Casey?
I'm not going to ask a question that takes up any time. I just want to throw something out there which I'd love to see over the next couple of days. And I know we're all familiar with this concern that, and this great panel you have that was helping you out, all the wonderful things you're doing. I can remember being in meetings very similar to this going back 30 years. Addressing almost exactly the same problem. So the real question, not that they all haven't done a lot of good, they have. I mean, that's not a negative, but it's just what can we do now what can we build upon that's really different and strengthen that? I'd just like to see that as a,
Can I respond? Because
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to be here for the entire meeting, as David knows.
Oh, okay.
I have to get back east to Pittsburgh and some things there. But the thing that I think, well, there are a couple of things that are different right now. As I said, we have a president, a very unusual president right now. Now, he may not be around much longer, right? So that's item number one. And you have to actually think about what are you going to do to sustain this progress? And a lot of us think it really is progress that has occurred. What are you going to do to sustain this if he is not reelected? So there are people thinking about those issues and about institutionalizing these changes. But the bigger goal, at least in my mind, is, well, I'm sorry, the bigger driver in my mind is the international environment. You know, we've been, as scientists, we've been yelling and screaming, there's a problem, and the public sort of says, yeah, right. You know, I don't need to know algebra. You know, that's effectively the answer that we get back. But to me, and let me just preface this by saying, I'm a strict believer in international competition. I think that we do ourselves harm if we try to close off the American people from the effects of globalization. Our country is a country that has always thrived on competition, as I read our history. But one day in the not too distant future, I am absolutely convinced that China is going to put a woman on the moon. And that's going to scare the living daylights out of Americans. And this is like 10, 15 years away. And even getting there, there are going to be all kinds of precursors that the American dream is not going to be sustainable unless we empower Americans to get the kind of jobs that power middle class living standards. And we can see a preview of this going on right now. There are upwards of 14, maybe as many as 20, 25, 40 million Americans, I don't know what the numbers are, I defer to anyone who has better statistics, who can't get a job right now. There are several 100,000 jobs in this country that can't get an American. And these are jobs that have a very interesting character. As I speak to policymakers, I say, you need to go learn about something called CNC, which is computer numerical controls. It's a type of technology that looks like it's going to be the wave of the future in terms of how manufacturing gets done, but it requires a kind of worker that has the kinds of skills that we in our community are used to having people graduate from high school with. And so to get to the American dream is probably going to drive more Americans, I believe, to do the rational thing. It's like that saying by Winston Churchill, you can always count on Americans to find the best solution after they've tried everything else.
Thank you so much, Joe. Casey raised